Innovation work, you're going to get things wrong. And you've got to acknowledge that when you're trying to do things that have not been done before, failure is just part of the package. And you just have to figure out how do you learn from that and move on.
What are the secrets that drive the businesses you love or nonprofits you admire? Join us as we uncover the surprising ideas at the intersection of causes and brands. I'm Dave Raley.
And I'm Berna. Each episode, learn from leaders of nonprofits and companies that will give you insights that you can put into action. This is the Purpose and Profit Podcast.
This episode is brought to you by Virtuous, the only responsive CRM that provides fundraising, marketing, and volunteer tools you need to create personal connections with your donors and grow giving. Learn more at virtuous.org. Welcome to the show today. We are thrilled to have a guest joining us who's at the cutting edge of innovation and entrepreneurship. And joining us today is David Farmer. He's the Officer of Innovation and New Ventures at Chick-fil-A. His journey with Chick-fil-A actually began way back in 1991 after he completed his marketing internship while he was at Georgia Tech. And from his start, he was a marketing consultant, and he's just been really instrumental in crafting the iconic Chick-fil-A restaurant experience and now drives innovation across the whole company. Beyond Chick-fil-A, David has actively contributed to several boards, including Rome, Credit Union of Georgia, Plywood, and Untold, reflecting his commitment and community and social impact. David and I had the opportunity to meet at a event that Chick-fil-A puts on for nonprofit leaders just a little bit earlier this year. And David, I was just blown away by the investment that Chick-fil-A makes in the philanthropic sector. So welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. And you're kind to say that, but hopefully that's who we are, going all the way back to our founder, Truett Cathy. That's just us trying to live it out.
Yeah, I could sense that just from even the honor of bringing Truett into the conversation and in that investment in the community. And so we're super excited to have you on the show. I have to admit, though, David, when I first heard that Chick-fil-A had an innovation team, my thought was, wait a second, isn't it just chicken sandwiches? How hard could that be, right? How much innovation could be needed in this sector, right? And yet, as I've gotten deeper, and we'll talk about today, taking a tour of your innovation, meeting your team, the facility, the way you work across the organization, man, I'm excited to dive into it.
Yeah, well, thank you. There is a lot that goes on behind the curtain, but that's what makes it fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, let's just start. I'd love to hear your story about how you got started in the space. I mean, how does one even get involved in Chick-fil-A? And was innovation a part of it from the beginning?
Yeah, so I'll give you my story and then talk about was innovation part of Chick-fil-A's story from the beginning. I'm an Atlanta native, and Chick-fil-A happens to be based in Atlanta. And I went to school in Atlanta at Georgia Tech, studying engineering, but not really sure what I was going to do with that because I don't know if I was really, really a hardcore engineer at heart. And then in maybe a God moment or just a moment of serendipity, through a scholarship organization, I met a gentleman who was a leader at Chick-fil-A, Tim Desopoulos, and he invited me to come have lunch with him at the Chick-fil-A campus. And he was working on the very first freestanding restaurant Chick-fil-A ever opened. Just Tim being Tim, invited me in, showed me what he was doing, and that led to an internship. And Tim's this unbelievable guy who went on to become Chick-fil-A's president, and he just retired within the last year after a 40-plus-something year career. But just his willingness to take an interest in some kid at school was huge. And that's how I came to Chick-fil-A, because I wasn't thinking restaurants, chicken, any of that, but was just drawn in by the people, Tim, and then others, and the culture. And it's been a good thing. And so I've been feel very blessed to have been part of the organization for a long time now.
You know, it's amazing to me, by the way, just to reflect on that for a moment. You know, I think sometimes when we tell our stories in hindsight, they sound very intentional and like all along I was planning. And yet it's this combination, certainly of who you are and your interests, but also those intersections that we just don't know, that those lunches, those conversations, and then what ultimately those can mean in our lives and in the world.
Agree. And so it makes me think I need to be willing to reach out to folks myself and do for others what Tim did for me. If I go back quickly to your question about, Chick-fil-A and innovation, we're a family business. Our original founder's now deceased, but Truett Cathy, he was an innovator from the jump. And we give him credit for kind of creating the first chicken sandwich that ever became commercially available. He put food in malls before anybody else was doing it. He had a very unique cut on franchising with what we call our operating model. So all kinds of innovations that Truett brought. He was just a disruptor and an incredibly gifted entrepreneur, very grounded in his faith and values, and that made for a really interesting combination. So we can go deeper on that, but I think we get it honest because it's in the DNA. I might argue as we grew, started to drift a little bit from that and have had to come back and make innovation a part of the story again.
Yeah, it's interesting because like Dave keeps saying, when we think of Chick-fil-A, we think of chicken sandwiches, and how much innovation could you have around that? Or maybe you consider Chick-fil-A to be in a different industry, whether that's like quick serve restaurants or something, but how do you literally pay attention to the market of how people are responding to chicken sandwiches and everything else Chick-fil-A does to determine like what proactive changes and strategies you need to make?
Yeah, that's a big question, Carly. We are in the chicken sandwich business, although we don't really think that's necessarily chicken sandwiches isn't what I would call our core competency. It's how do you think customer first and create experiences, and part and parcel of that is how we focus on leadership and creating cultures where service is honored, and there's a lot of dignity in that. Because I think we could do things other than chicken sandwiches. It's what we do now, but that could evolve over the course of time. So there's a lot to it, but it's gotten us where we are, and we can break this down. But as you grow, and we've grown enormously over time, it takes a lot to keep it working where people feel like it still feels personal and genuine, and you haven't lost sort of the magic that you might have had at the beginning. That's the trick. How do you scale? How do you grow and not lose what helped you get there in the first place?
So I know when we talked previously, you talked about this drive-thru innovation story where you went from like 100 cars per hour to 800. Can you walk us through that and kind of what happened there?
Yeah, that's a story that's playing out right now. For the longest time, we were only in malls. And then in the mid to late 80s, back when Tim was helping to make this happen, we got into freestanding restaurants. And now we've sort of seen this whole emergence of digital as well. But when you get into freestanding restaurants, you have the opportunity to have drive-thrus. And we did, and we're all trying to learn how drive-thrus work, just like other brands, McDonald's among them, doing the same thing. I remember the first time we ever had an operator move 100 cars through their drive-thru in an hour, which seemed like this remarkable feat, kind of like when someone breaks the 4-minute mile mark, right? Didn't know it was even possible. And you watch the Olympics that have been going on here recently, and you think, wow, look at the amazing breakthroughs that are happening now. Well, that was 100, and as we've continued to focus on that, just one innovation after another, more recently, we've had a couple of operators that have moved 500 cars through their drive-thru in an hour, which means somebody's got to leave with their food every 7.5 seconds. But we're getting ready in the coming months to open a store on the south side of Atlanta, 2 stories, 4 drive-thru lanes, 2 run under the building, 2 run beside it, and it's built to do 800 cars an hour. That's what we've modeled it at, which means somebody's getting food every 5 seconds. But all kinds of innovation have to take place. You have to challenge everything you've ever done in order to make that happen, because doing things the same way normally is not going to help you get a radically different result. And so we're very excited about that. And the whole point is, can customers see a restaurant that looks really, really busy but still have confidence? It's okay. I know I'll get in and out of there quickly, and they'll take care of me along the way. And that's the goal. And we're going to see how that plays out in just a couple of months when we open that new restaurant up.
David, you talk about culture, and I think about, the one thing I realized, even as you've shared today, is that the ability to provide great service changes over time, right? I think of another thing that I noticed, thanks to your team pointing it out, is, the prevalence of Uber Eats and, DoorDash drivers, and how Chick-fil-A recognizes that its service is to them, the drivers as well. They are the customer in the instance in which they're in the store, and so creating little places for them to be. But there's just so many examples of how this innovation and focus on the core service of Chick-fil-A needs to play out in every piece of the business. So let's talk about culture for just a minute.
Yeah.
I want to ask about the culture of innovation, but first, your comment about service. How does an organization of your size and scale and increasing scale do that? Because I am in awe of any organization that can reach the kind of scale that you have, and have down to the service member standing in the parking lot with an iPad, taking orders, to provide that same quality of care, not just the operational or technology side, but the true care and service for the customer. What is that? What is maintaining or creating a culture that does that look like?
Two big thoughts come to mind to that, Dave. One is you have to figure out what can never change. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, the leaders, the founders, the drivers of the organization have to be really, really clear on that. And then what is likely to happen to everything else? And so Chick-fil-A, there are a couple of things that we know they're at the core of who we are. They cannot change. They're not up for negotiation or discussion. Apart from that, virtually everything else is fair game for change. So for us, we have a corporate purpose. Everybody knows it. It's part of what draws a lot of people to the organization. Ours is kind of unique. It says that we exist to glorify God by being faithful stewards of everything that's entrusted to us, and to have a positive influence on everyone who comes in contact with Chick-fil-A. Doesn't really say anything about returning shareholder value or any of that.
Yeah.
And then there are a couple of core values that we embrace. Don't mess with that stuff. But everything else, feel free. And the family has given us the ability to tweak, modify, scrap, rebuild, whatever, everything else, because the environment in which we do business has changed so radically. I mean, you referenced DoorDash and Uber Eats. They didn't exist a few years back. They had no plan for that. But as those things begin to emerge, we have to rethink a lot about the business, and we have a license to do it. But the purpose, the values, the operator model we have, that grounds us. And then, part of what Truett recognized early on, he was very successful running a single restaurant. But as he had a product that he knew had a lot of growth potential, the Chick-fil-A sandwich, he had to figure out, well, how do I replicate myself in order to grow? And that's how our operator model came along. And unlike a traditional franchise model where you're looking for their capital and you're really using other people's money to grow, he goes, I'll basically capitalize the business, and I'm willing to go slower to do that. What I want the leadership talent. And as I'm trying to replicate myself, because our good friend John Maxwell likes to say, 10s don't work for 7s, at least very long. And so he goes, I got to try to find the 9s and 10s who can lead the restaurant, be actively involved in the restaurant, not have other things going on, so that they can attract the 7, 8s, 9s, 10s who can help operate the restaurant. And so I think that's what helps us all the way down to the front line, try to get caliber of team member that can not only just do the job, but can do it in a way that the customer picks up on it. Hey, they really care about the work, and they care about me.
So good. And, I think there's they almost on the surface seem like things that shouldn't belong together, like the fact that you have such great ownership down to the local level, right? You've got these operators, which is wildly different than any other, food service related business I've ever seen. It's usually you just do whatever corporate tells you to do, pick up the playbook. So you've got this ownership at the local level, but you also have this incredible consistency, right? So it's not that everyone's just doing it their way, right? There's consistency. And then the other thing you said that I just want to, really accentuate is this difference between what can never change and what needs to change, which is basically everything else. And some organizations feel like either everything always needs to change or nothing ever will change, and there's not a distinction. And so holding on to those few core things and yet then being willing to question everything else just is I think such a powerful insight for our listeners. So thank you.
Yeah.
We'll talk just briefly about sustaining a culture of innovation, because that's a piece of the puzzle. You said, Truett was an innovator really from the beginning. You also hinted there were some times where you maybe moved away from that. So just what role has innovation played in your model?
I think it made Chick-fil-A different and unique because essentially Truett, he was a disruptor. And then we hit a point in time as we're growing. For a while, it was just go to more and more malls, and you're basically doing the same thing, but you're growing across the country as we went through a period of time called the malling of America, where these regional shopping malls popped up. Now we don't know what to do with regional shopping malls, so that's a whole different challenge. But then as we started building freestanding restaurants, we had the opportunity to follow Target, Walmart, Home Depot, and they're building these power retail centers all over the place. And they wanted us to come to what they call the pad out front. And we had this nice symbiotic relationship with these big box players. But then that has started to dry up as well. But during that period, I felt like we shifted from being really disruptive innovators to more just continuous improvement. And I think there's a place for that in any kind of innovation portfolio for sure. But Truett's son, Dan, came along, and as CEO, he's highly entrepreneurial as well, and he could feel it. And he's got great instincts. And he said, we've got to get back to this willingness and capability to play innovation at a kind of a different level. And so he pushed hard, and we went to learn about that. We went all over the country looking at folks that were doing it really well, folks that had innovation centers, folks that were out in Silicon Valley as an example that were really changing the world. And we looked at some of the tools and the models they use. And Dan said, we're going to do that back at Chick-fil-A. And we've got to get in there and impact our own culture again. And so we're very fortunate that we had his support and sponsorship. But that's probably going back a little over 15 years ago, began to kind of reboot innovation at Chick-fil-A. And it's something we have to continue to focus on, but I think it's made a really impactful difference to the business because there's been so much change and disruption in that period.
Every time you talk about how Chick-fil-A had this mall period, it just makes me think about when I went to undergrad. I went to Northern Arizona, and there was a Chick-fil-A, which is in Flagstaff. There was a Chick-fil-A in the actual mall area where you get your food, and I had Chick-fil-A every day, to the point that after college I needed a little bit of a Chick-fil-A break. Now I'm back to being a Chick-fil-A fan, but it was every day. That was my food card, Chick-fil-A. But I forgot that there was no drive-thru. It was just in the mall, basically.
Yeah.
But one of the things I wanted to ask you about, kind of bringing this idea of innovation to a tactical level, is there's this theory that a lot of people talk about called design thinking. And I'm wondering how you guys apply this internally at Chick-fil-A, or how you would recommend a nonprofit or a for-profit apply it in their own organizations.
Yeah, it's become a big idea at Chick-fil-A, and we are not the originators, as you know, Carly. We in our studies, we spent time out, and a lot of time in California. Went to IDEO in Palo Alto, which is arguably one of the world's largest and most successful design firms. I think they had a hand in it, along with some of the folks at Stanford. what's called the D School or the Design School at Stanford. A lot of partnership there, and they taught us different design thinking models. We came back, kind of put some of our own labels on it. It's a pretty simple concept, but the idea that one is very customer centric, and you go through a process of vetting ideas before you just commit big resources to them. And that's what we've learned, because I would tell you what had been common at times for us, and I see it in other organizations, is somebody that has authority, has an idea, and then you just go launch it. And there's not a lot of vetting. It may or may not be completely rooted in this sort of customer-centric vetting. And that can be really, really expensive. And so we had to go back and figure out what's it look like for us. And a simple example is we've had to invest heavily in the ability to prototype. Even as we started to build new restaurants, we had this warehouse, innovation warehouse space. We got foam core, a very inexpensive and flexible material, and would build out full-scale restaurants using foam core and then run simulation. We'd hire customers to come in and say, tell us what you think. We had golf carts they would use to simulate going through the drive-thru as an example, and tell us what works and doesn't work. And when you're doing it like that, there's nothing precious about it. You haven't invested too much in it, and so you can change it based on the feedback that you get from customers. Bring our own team members in. Does this work for you? Tell us about it. Versus just running out and building the store. Well, now you've got this really expensive thing you've created. It's very precious. It makes it really hard to change it. Stakes are higher. And so you just learn, how do you do just a minimally viable, prototype first, keep getting feedback before you even go to a stage where you want to test it out in the marketplace. So we had to learn all that, and now it shapes the approach we take to all kinds of work, not just the creation of a new store design.
Yeah, and I would say to nonprofit listeners, I'm sure you've had the experience where your CEO says, this is what we should do, and then everyone runs down that way and does that. But this can be applied in nonprofits too, like whether I'm totally stealing all of your thunder, Dave, but if you've listened to Dave talk about like launching a monthly giving program, you go out to all of your donors, talk to them about what really connects with them instead of just, coming up with something that you think is the best thing. And again, I'm stealing your example here, Dave, but you've talked about like a certain organization that you worked with that you thought, well, we'll just go with, the number one topic that donors seem to respond to, but that didn't work. Like they had to change to what donors were actually going to respond to when it came to monthly donations. But again, you can go out with an MVP version of that, even in the nonprofit space. I think we should let's link the design thinking kind of theory in the show notes. So for those listening, if you haven't heard of it, It's definitely worth just reading through the steps and seeing how it can be applied.
Yeah, you could jump on YouTube and just search a design thinking video in 5 minutes, get a good understanding of it. But I think a lot of people skip it because it may feel like a slow path. It feels like, why am I adding steps? This is just bureaucratic. But it really can be a faster path to success.
Yep.
And a less expensive path to success, because what'll throw you back is if you get it wrong. And it's really, really hard to not get it wrong when you're doing something new and challenging.
Yeah. And the example Carly was hinting at, with on the nonprofit sector, that organization ultimately took what they thought was the fast path, built the thing, shipped it, kind of finished product, then took, 6 to 8 months to realize it wasn't working, and then another 6 to 8 months to rebuild it, and ended up burning about 18 months when they could have taken 6 weeks early on to basically prototype it and then launch with, the right thing in the market early on. And I think, even in your space, there's a to be unnamed competitor that recently opened a restaurant in our town. And I'm like, who decided this was a good layout for a restaurant? It's an awful customer experience, and everybody knows it, including the employees. But they've built a physical finished thing in a small town in Western Washington. And so are they even going to get the feedback, to improve it? And if they do, it's a sunk cost. The franchisee has spent the money. And so just the fact that you are so intentional about that, I had the opportunity a while ago to get to walk through that warehouse and to see the prototype of the store you talked about that's getting ready to launch. And you're not done. You're going to continue to prototype. You've got one location you'll open, you'll learn. And I'm going to be fascinated, by the way, to see how you move such significant volume. You really, are fitting the kind of culture of today, but how you then retain that brand of service and care. And this isn't just like, drive by our factory of food, kind of experience. And I'm sure there's been a lot of thinking that's gone into that.
Can I share a thought? You talked about you burn resources. You might burn time. You might burn your budget. I think something else you burn when you make a mistake is you burn some of your credibility with your team, with your community, with your supporters, whoever. And I got to be honest, in innovation work, you're going to get things wrong. And you've got to acknowledge that when you're trying to do things that have not been done before, failure is just part of the package. And you just have to figure out how do you learn from that and move on. But you definitely can take your batting average up when you use a process like this. And you don't just go, I did a launch. So I challenge people to think about that. Your credibility is at stake too. And that may be the hardest resource to reestablish.
Is your faith-based organization searching for a leader who truly aligns with your mission? Faith Search Partners is the premier executive search firm dedicated to faith-driven organizations. With over 130 years of combined experience and a 98% success rate, they guide you through every step of the process, ensuring you find the right leader to drive your mission forward. Trust the experts who live their faith. Visit faithsearchpartners.com today to learn more.
So as you think about, we talked about this a little bit before, but this idea of balancing innovation with your organization's core values, some might look at those as sometimes either in tension or maybe even opposition, like, well, are we going to stay the same or are we going to change? You've already talked about how important it is to hold on to your core values and your non-negotiables, but then also everything else is fair game. How does that actually play out? In a manager or a person on your team making decisions? I'm just fascinated because I think that sounds really cool, but in practice, like I said, it's like, how does that really play out?
Yeah. I'll tell you what makes it hard is there's a little bit of inherent tension in our system that's never going to completely resolve. And what I mean by that is we have customers, people that actually have money, walk up to Chick-fil-A, drive up to Chick-fil-A and purchase food and have an experience. And we have our own, our restaurant operators, and I'm part of what's called a support center staff. And so our job is to help them be successful. Well, sometimes what's in the best interest of the customer may not be in the best interest of the operator and vice versa. So we have this little expression that we use. The customer is the most important person to the business, and the operator is the most important person in the business. Now, that may not translate exactly to another organization, but I think what you can take from it is who do you serve and who is critical to enabling you to serve those folks. And you have to, a lot of design thinking is being very customer-centric. But again, we have an external customer, an internal customer, and there may be conflict in terms of what they want. So we have to sort through that and be really upfront, particularly with our operators, about how we're managing that tension. And it's going to look different in a different organization, but I would be surprised if there's not some dynamic like that may be at play.
Well, and even just to make it very concrete, your Atlanta offices are not called headquarters.
That's right.
Your Atlanta office is referred to as
support center. Yeah,
the support center. You exist to support the operators who exist to serve the customers, which I think both businesses and nonprofits can learn from. It's not. It is the end user or donor or customer or beneficiary, but how do you serve those people that are creating those experiences?
Yeah. And you just have to kind of keep going upstream and figure out ultimately who are we. For us, it is that paying customer. And if we lose track of that, and if what they need first doesn't drive the things that need to change or evolve to meet just a new set of circumstances, new need state for them, there's no way we'll stay healthy and relevant over the course of time. At the same time, we have to be mindful for what our operators need. What's happening with the team member community. As we grow and get bigger and things get more complex, how does that land on our team? How do we set them up to be successful as well? But the support center, or if you're an organization and you've got sort of whatever your version of your home office or nerve center is, can't lose track of what's happening in the field, whatever your field is.
Yeah, I love how you talk about Truett Cathy so much. I worked at Mayo Clinic as one of my first jobs, and the culture at Mayo Clinic is very strong, and people mention the Mayo brothers all the time, even though they've been gone for a long time. But their culture has really stayed through all of these years, and it sounds like that's the same at Chick-fil-A. So we've been talking a lot about innovation culture, but can you talk a little bit about just like what type of leadership practices having such a strong organizational culture?
Yeah, that's a big question. Well, we espouse the whole notion of servant leadership. We even have this statue that sort of makes that point, and it's right in the middle of our principal atrium. But it began with Truett, and then his son, Dan, was our CEO for a long time. He's now chairman. And now Dan's son, Andrew, is the CEO. And what you will find, they will never ask you to do something they aren't willing to do themselves. The leader, when it comes to the hard thing, the bad job, they go first. And they've always been that way. And they've been very, very consistent about that. Dan, in fact, really pushed us to take service to the next level. He almost wanted us to do what felt very awkward at first, the kind of service that you might see in a more upscale restaurant. How do you bring that into a quick service or fast food restaurant? And he would be in our cafe we have on our campus, walking around, clearing everybody's table, carrying their trays for them. And you almost felt awkward, like, no, Dan, you shouldn't do this for me. And he would insist. Part of it's just who he is, but he was trying to make the point. This is the business we're in. And so we have to do this. We have to change the language. We have to change behaviors. And if it doesn't come from the leaders, I don't know how it ever sticks. So that's a big part of it. Now, you could argue before you even did that, somebody's got to have a vision for where you're trying to go. And so I think that's part of the leader's responsibility as well. How big is that vision? How willing are they to challenge assumptions or the way we do it today? I like to say, I think the most effective leaders walk around a little bit with this healthy discontent for status quo. Not unhealthy, not bitter or angry, but they are always thinking, well, this got us to here, might not get us to where we want to be long term. So hence I've got this discontent. What would get us there? And how do we unearth that? And if I'm a leader, how do I call for that or sponsor that or support the people that are working on it? And what do I do when things don't go well? How do I handle the failure? And how do I treat the person that took the risk and sort of stuck their neck out? Do I go to her and honor her for what she's done, for the risk that she took? Or do we put bad labels on it? So anyway, that I don't know how it works in an organization if you don't have leaders that champion innovation in that way.
As you shared that, one of the things I was thinking about is, I feel like, and I've had this experience in my career, sometimes we walk into work and we kind of take off our human hat, or I'm a customer, I'm a human, I'm a whatever, and we put on our I'm a innovation person hat, or I'm a strategy hat, and a lot of times I think that can be not a good thing for our own leadership, because we don't see that. And so just to hear that Dan and leadership is not only thinking strategically what should we be doing and how should we be innovating, but then displaying those day-to-day behaviors. I just think that we can't miss that, especially when it comes down to, again, I'm thinking of that local staff member who's, serving the customer, that if that train of service hasn't gone all the way from the top down through to the operator and the whatever the line manager looks like and all that, it's just so critical.
There's a lot to be said for just growth, even scale. I know a lot of organizations, that's part of their agenda. How do we grow? How do we get bigger? How do we attract more resources? And that's good. But you don't ever want to get away from that sort of founder mindset that you had at the very, very beginning. For us, that was Truett, but organizations just like the Mayo Brothers, they all have their founders, and you don't want to lose that spirit. And so the challenge is, as you grow and with it inherently comes a little more complexity, how do you keep that from snuffing out that spirit?
Yeah. So good. Well, David, this has been so helpful. We always like to ask our guests a little lightning round of questions. Before we go to there, I'm going to ask you just one more question, and that is, you've served certainly in the for-profit sector for so long, but you've also been on boards of nonprofits. You and I met in the context of a nonprofit training and equipping event, so you clearly care about nonprofit leaders. What's one piece of advice that you would give to a nonprofit leader listening to us today, just thinking about your years of experience and exposure to innovation, or really open question? What would you say to a nonprofit leader?
I think it can be lonely to be a nonprofit leader. And so the first thing that comes to my mind, if you are a nonprofit leader, what kind of community do you have? You may have a community with some of your leadership team. Perhaps if you have a board, your board. But even outside of that, are you connected in some form of community where you can go to like-minded individuals and talk about the challenges you're facing? Wrestle through some of the decisions you're having to make, and feel like you've got some support. So it doesn't feel like you're carrying this load or this challenge or this decision all by yourself.
So good.
Yeah, as a nonprofit leader, I can definitely say that that's important. And there are, even Dave and I are part of a couple of organizations that allow you to have that community in the nonprofit space.
Yeah, you're not losing your mind when you're feeling a certain way, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's huge.
Yeah. All right, so let's move to the lightning round. As I mentioned, we're going to ask you a few quick questions. And first thing that comes to your mind. So let's start with, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a professional basketball player.
How tall are you?
6 feet tall.
Okay.
But this is when I was little, so I had to move on from that. And then the honest answer is, I didn't know. I went through school and I didn't know, and I had a couple of internship opportunities. This isn't very lightning round, but I had a couple of internship opportunities and said, well, it's probably not that. And then you go back to where we started with my serendipitous meeting with Tim, and I wouldn't have thought it would have necessarily been Chick-fil-A, but it turned out it worked that way. So I always say, hey, just keep trying things and give yourself permission to say that ain't it if it ain't it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. What is your favorite podcast to listen to?
The one I'm on right now is Acquired, which is really long form, and it tells the history of these big brands and companies we know about. Like there's this 3.5 hour interview with Howard Schultz on the whole story of Starbucks. Crazy.
I download that now.
Yeah, me too.
And then they'll talk about brands like Microsoft or Porsche or Hermes or whatever. And it's just interesting to hear the whole backstory, and it's long form so that you're going to get into the issues and challenges. So that's what I'm geeking out on right now.
Yeah. That's great. I love Business Wars, if you've never listened to that, where they go through.
I'm writing that down.
Yeah, it's kind of what you just said, except like they'll go through like Microsoft versus Apple, their entire stories and how they interacted with each other during that time. So it's also a long form, but it's great when I'm taking 3-hour-long bike rides to listen to like the whole story of, some two businesses.
Well, good for you for 3-hour bike rides.
Yeah. Well, I just did a triathlon, so I've been doing a lot of biking.
Boom.
Okay, what book are you reading or just recently finished?
The Elon Musk biography by Walter Isaacson.
Oh,
fascinating. Some things that he's known for that I don't know we necessarily want to embrace, but you talk about disruptor. He is an unbelievable disruptor who has this ginormous vision for what could be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. What show are you binging on Netflix or whatever streaming platform you use?
So I don't know if this is good or bad, but I'll say it. But Your Honor on, I can't remember if that's Netflix or Apple. It's one of the two. And then I just got back from Ireland, and I learned about Dairy Girls. It's about some teenagers. It's on Netflix, set in the 90s, I think, when there was this huge conflict between Ireland and Northern Ireland going on. It's comedy. And so I stayed in Derry when I was in Ireland.
Oh.
And so it's funny. It's 22, each episode 22 minutes long, but
nice.
It's kind of wicked wit.
Yeah. Okay. And what app do you use the most?
Ooh, that's a good question. What app do I use the most? My Garmin Connect app.
Oh, because you're a runner, or what do you use? What do you use it for?
I don't run. I have been a runner, and now I do all kinds of things. But I'm using it to say if I go hard, and am I doing that in a way and where I'm staying healthy?
Okay, I use the Garmin Connect app as well. So
yeah,
mainly for running though. And last question: what refreshes and refuels you?
Working out, playing golf, and traveling with friends and family.
That's great. Good answers.
Yeah. Sounds like you like to get outside. I like that too.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, we all have those rhythms, and that's one of the reasons we like to ask that question is just, I think it helps as you get a glimpse into different leaders and different answers, but we all have something, that we go to. So
yeah, I like to work hard and then play hard. And then, the reason I look at the Garmin watch all the time, I'm trying to figure out, am I maintaining some semblance of healthy balance?
Yeah. So good. Well, David, thank you again for being on the show, for just, for following the opportunities that have, come up in your career that have led to other opportunities, and for investing in others, including our listeners. So just appreciate you. Thanks for being on the show.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
Awesome. And for our listeners, thank you for joining us today. I hope you learned something new, that you've been challenged, that your perspective has been widened, and that you can apply that to your leadership. Have a great day.
We're grateful for our partners this season, including Virtuous, a software company committed to helping nonprofits grow generosity. Faith Search Partners, an executive search firm specifically for faith-based organizations. And Imago Consulting, an advisory firm that helps nonprofits and businesses grow through innovation. For more episodes, find us wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to subscribe so that you're always up to date. We'd love it if you would rate the show and leave us a review. Your feedback is valuable to us. Follow the show on LinkedIn, or you can reach us at our website at purposeandprofitpodcast.com. You can also sign up for our email newsletter to get updates whenever we launch a new episode. Thanks for listening.